Good morning, everyone. Wow, Dr. Mackey is such a hard act to follow. I'll be honest with you. I hope that you took this 10 minutes to forget about how incredible he is so that I could speak to you in a very uninteresting fashion. No, seriously, like Dr. Mackey said, I am absolutely grateful for this opportunity to speak to you all today about the important work that my organization is doing to impact the capacity for childcare in the South Sound region. And like Dr. Mackey said, I am truly hopeful that today you take this message and you recognize that as a collective, we can do something with this message and we can truly reduce some of the barriers that we're experiencing to childcare. So let me start by introducing myself. My name is Maria Tobin. I am a U.S. Army veteran, go Army. I'm a former military spouse for over 21 years, and I also now have the distinct pleasure of working for this organization right here called the South Sound Military and Communities Partnership. Essentially what we do is we provide regional leadership to bridge the Joint Base Lewis-McChord command team with our surrounding South Sound executives. This work is very important because what we can do with this group here is we have this expansive framework of collaboration where we can then take these ideas and these initiatives and we can make both impactful and actionable recommendations to our various levels of government. SSMCP focuses its mission on dealing with issues and collaborating around issues that arise at the nexus of the military-civilian communities. And this work is important for a couple of reasons. First of all, I don't need to tell you all that JBLM is a huge economic driver for this economy here in the local area. In addition, what a lot of people don't realize is that by DoD policy, the majority of our service members stationed at JBLM must look for housing off base first. So that historically means that about 2/3 of our population assigned to JBLM actually live in our surrounding communities and are expected to get services there. So for this reason, SSMCP convenes local, regional, and state expert stakeholders around these nexus points, like business and economic development, childcare, education, housing, healthcare, land use, social services, and transportation. Now, obviously, I'm here to talk to you about, childcare. And let me tell you a few reasons why SSMCP focuses on childcare. Number one, we do have childcare that's on the base. However, just like that DoD policy about housing, JBLM didn't design that childcare around getting everybody childcare at JBLM. Again, they expected those service members living in the community to look for childcare in the community. Now, as you can imagine, I don't need to belabor the issue that we live in a very high-cost area. So imagine a military family that moves to the South Sound. They quickly realize that in order to combat the high cost of living, they're going to need to get a second income. And so what we're seeing is that, unfortunately, when they're trying to get that second income, they're often defeated in their pursuits because without that built-in network like friends and family to help that spouse look for childcare, what ends up happening is they have to rely on that community-based childcare, which is twice the cost of what on-base childcare would be. And that amount can total up to 50% of a service member's take-home pay. So as you can imagine, what do you think happens? They don't look. They don't look for that secondary source of employment. Furthermore, SSMCP is currently engaging right now in a statewide study to look at the military spouse employment barriers that we're experiencing at all 5 of our military installations across the state. And it should come as absolutely no surprise that childcare is the #1 barrier. Now, I want to stress a point here, and that is that the lack of childcare that our military can find is not just affecting that military family's financial readiness. In fact, it becomes a nationwide military defense issue when we know that the number one factor in recruitment and retention of our armed forces is quality of life. And so this should be especially important to every single person in this room when we are right now experiencing recruitment of our armed forces at a 50-year low. So recognizing that this is an issue, the Department of Defense has said we've got to improve the quality of life for our service members. This is really important. And so they have produced what's called a military child care subsidy, which allows these service members to use the local child care community services. But the problem is that we're running into the fact that even though this program is expanding, the reality is that our supply of childcare the demand for childcare is far exceeding the supply for childcare. And that's essentially because we live in a massive childcare desert. Now, we're not alone in this issue. In fact, more than 50% of the country lives in a childcare desert. But as you can see here, Washington is one of the worst offenders, having more than 63% of our population living in a childcare desert. And that childcare desert does have an actual definition. In fact, by the Department of Child, Youth, and Families definition, that childcare desert essentially is where you have more than 3 children to 1 provider ratio in any given area. Now, I want to stress that the lack of childcare is not just an issue that affects our families with small children. And in fact, it affects us all. So if you take a look at the data here on this slide, what you can see is this comes from a report called The Mounting Costs of Childcare. And it's a collaborative document that was produced by the Association of Washington Business Institute, the Washington Department of Commerce, as well as the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, to really illustrate how the lack of childcare is not only affecting our Washington families, but our employers and the overall state economy. So as you can see here, it obviously is impacting families because they can't get that secondary source of income. It affects businesses because those businesses are losing productivity on absenteeism and turnover. And finally, you can see to the tune of our state economy, this costs us an annual $6.5 billion per year. And that is a totalization of annual and opportunity, or direct and opportunity costs as it relates to the lack of childcare. Now, I do want to stress that I've talked a lot about the wrong. I've talked a lot about, doom and gloom. Now I want to talk about the right. I want to talk about what we can actually do right here, right now, as a collective in this community. And it starts with community planning. One way we can reasonably expand childcare in our communities is by reducing unnecessary barriers that are not only delaying childcare developments from starting up, but it's often derailing these businesses. So one of the missing components that we've seen, unlike parks, public schools, and transportation, we're missing childcare from those category of essential goods, public goods and services. And what ends up happening is that we're not planning for them in local policies and development regulations. And this is even after we know that childcare assists in both academic and emotional development of our children. It's maintaining the financial vitality of our households. But even after the American Planning Association has been recommending for the last 25 years that we need to incorporate childcare in our comprehensive plans, we're still not doing it. So to quite the contrary, what we're seeing when we we went into these roundtable discussions with childcare businesses, planners, architects. What we found were these were the most regulatory barriers that we were seeing that were affecting childcare. And I want to focus on zoning and conditional use permits because essentially that kind of encapsulates all the other barriers as well. So the point that I want to make is that, first of all, we have a very small area of where childcare can go in most municipalities, and I'll go into a little bit more detail in a second. But when they can go there, they're often succumbed to conditional use permitting, which means that yes, they can operate there, but they have to wait 4 to 6 months before they go to a hearing examiner. That costs a minimum of $10,000, and then they don't know what additional conditions will be placed upon that business, which are often going to diminish the profitability of that organization. Now you can see, obviously, this is going to affect how they fund that business. So when there's that uncertainty, they're less likely to get those small business loans or commercial lending, and they also can't get any sort of state or federal subsidies. So to further prove this point, I'm presenting you a map from the Center of American Progress, and essentially what you can see here is a heat map showing where there's adequate amounts of childcare in the blue, and the rest of that orange area is our big, massive desert. So when we took a look at this map, we noticed that there was a pattern forming, and that pattern was where there's an abundance of childcare, we also saw that commonly it was most outright permitted within the development regulations of those jurisdictions. This is a further point down in Thurston County. We have the city of Lacey, where you can see there's this pocket of copious amounts of childcare, but the rest of 2/3 of Lacey, by DCYF definition, says that they're in a massive childcare desert. So here's the great news. The great news is, well, actually, let me start before that. So when I went to the city of Lakewood, who is the executive agent for the South Sound Military Communities Partnership, I asked them, after seeing this pattern, what do you currently allow in your jurisdiction? And they told me 4%, and I thought, wow, 4% is really, really low. And so then I asked Pierce County planners, can you tell me what Pierce County allows? And they came back and said 1%. And then I went to Thurston County, and I said, Thurston County, what's your policy? 0%. Does that mean that no child care centers can go in Thurston County? No. It just means that every child care center has to go in front of that hearing examiner, has to pay those fees, has to wait those times before they can be allowed to operate. Now, to further emphasize how limiting this is for childcare developers, imagine that these areas are already small, but when you have conflicting businesses that are already operating in those zones, it even further limits where those childcare centers can go. So we absolutely saw this pattern of unintentionally imposing unnecessarily restrictive barriers to childcare. Now, here's the great news. So I went back to the city of Lakewood, and I asked them, okay, this is 4% is really low. What can we do about this? And so after very, very careful consideration, they went back to their planning commission, and the planning managers of the city of Lakewood said, wait, we could expand commercial childcare to nearly all of our commercial zones, and we could also expand childcare in our residential zones by reducing or removing that conditional use permit so that they could move into compatible structures like churches. And so you can see that this amendment increased the city of Lakewood's allowance by 48%. We were so proud of this, by the way. So proud of this. So here's the other great news, is that this is already happening. The city of Seattle in 2020 passed the Child Care Near You ordinance, where it essentially opened up child care to nearly all zones in the city for both commercial and residential child care. In the state of Washington in 2021, there was state legislation that was passed that said that local governments could waive traffic impact fees, which, by the way, can cost up to $300,000. I'm not joking. Then we see in 2022, the state passed legislation to outlaw unnecessarily restricting HOAs, homeowners associations, and landlords from allowing those renters to have childcare businesses in their homes. And then you can see in 2024, we had House Bill 2468, that was our most recent one, where it didn't pass, but it wanted to allow childcare outright in all zones where there was elementary schools. So here you can see a slew of other jurisdictions across the country that are passing reforms to their childcare because they realize that this is truly unnecessary, but also unintentional to restricting childcare. So I must tell you, I'm going to conclude this presentation by saying I shared all this information with you with a small admission. I also have a favor to ask. In local government, it is widely known that a comprehensive community plan is an essential guiding document that is used to plan for necessary community services and should work for all of its citizens. When we plan together, we can effectively allocate resources and we can empower our communities with the knowledge and opportunity to make informed land use decisions about future growth. Therefore, it is so important, and I ask all of you today as a collective, that we take on a more active role in engaging our city leadership, our planners, our elected officials to ensure that they incorporate the desperate need that we have right now for childcare expansion into our ongoing comprehensive plan reviews. This is more important now than ever, and I'll tell you why. Right now, Pierce and Thurston County are undergoing their comprehensive plan review. Pierce County will continue that review until the end of 2024, and in Thurston County, that will go on till the end of 2025. And this is super important because this periodic plan review only happens once every 10 years. So our recommendations are pretty simple. If utilized, this will grossly expand areas of childcare where they can operate through our cities and counties. And finally, we can intentionally create spaces that have been historically overlooked, essential services in our community. In closing, I do want to share that this initiative came from one child care owner coming to me, telling me that she had trouble opening up a child care center with the county due to zoning issues. So I took this back to my social services working group led by United Way of Pierce County in the city of Olympia, and I asked, and we all asked, why does it have to be that way? And more importantly, why does it have to stay this way? And this reminds me of something that someone once said to me about technology problems. If you have a problem with technology and you've exhausted everything to try to resolve that problem, give it to a child. And you know what I'm talking about. Because unlike adults who have preconceived ideas that something will and will not work, if you give it to a child, they will try everything, and let me tell you, they will find a way. I have kids, I don't know about you guys, but they'll find a way to work that technology. And so this initiative felt just like that. We took something that somebody said, you can't do, and we didn't stop until we did. And so I want to conclude by saying that we all know that there are several barriers impacting childcare. This is just one of them. But SSMCP and now many jurisdictions in our region and in the nation know that this is essential work to moving the needle to expanding childcare capacity in our region. In closing, I want to thank Green Trike so much for the opportunity and the platform to be able to share this work today. And it is my absolute honor to be working and sharing this space alongside you all who are creating a better future for our children and our community.